Good afternoon, Year 12, and welcome back to Psychopathology. So we are steaming along. You have just finished your notes on attachment. We've looked at social influence, memory, research methods and approaches. Research methods, we've got some of the trickiest stuff that we need to do. Hopefully when we're back in person, then it's a little bit easier for me to answer some tricky questions that you're going to have. But we'll wait and see, maybe leave that to the start of Year 13. So here we are, psychopathology. You've looked at definitions of abnormality already, so you've started to see how we classify somebody as being abnormal. Now we need to delve into some of the psychological disorders that we're going to be studying, starting with depression. So a quick recap quiz. I haven't really been doing these actually, but I think actually it could be quite good for you to test yourself on some of the knowledge previously. That's my biggest concern out of all of this. Well, I have two big concerns. Obviously, one is that you're actually doing the work, which a majority of you are doing fantastic, actually, really, really well. And that actually you are still embedding and still interleaving some previous content. We don't know what's going to happen with the exams next year. The problem that we have, there's a massive discussion on quite a few forums that I'm on, is that maybe they'll cut modules out, maybe they'll get rid of a paper, but everybody teaches the spec differently and teaches different things at different times. So I don't see that happening. I think actually they're probably going to be quite cruel and make you sit all three, maybe with lower grade boundaries, but who knows, nobody knows. So we need to take it that, we're still chugging through, doing the best you can, and you are all doing the best you can, which is great. So if you want to do a quick recap quiz, I've got some here. In which place does the Oedipus complex take place? At which stage, sorry. When a respondent answers in a way that makes them look good, what is that an example of? Bit of research methods. Remember, 30% of your A-level. So if that's the one you're really struggling with, spend some time in remember you have 4 hours per subject per week of independent stuff. Maybe you could focus it on some of the past content. That might be a good idea. Minority influence can lead to what type of conformity? Interference, explanation of which memory store, forgetting from which memory store, and in learning, what is the primary drive? So you can pause that now, have a think to yourself, what are the answers to those? And then I've got the answers here for you to look at. Sorry, not depression. I'm looking at phobias today. That's what we're looking at. An introduction to phobias. So getting you thinking. In pairs or with, whoever's at home, they can join in. Rank the following phobias from most common to least. So have a look at those. Fear of heights, vegetables, small spaces, dogs and spiders. Where do you think they are in relation to the most common in the United Kingdom in general, to the least common? Then match them up. What did you think? So fear of spiders is top. Fear of vegetables, weirdly, at the bottom. Heights and dogs and small spaces. I would have thought claustrophobia would be higher, but spiders, yep, straight up there. My partner, who was a firefighter, there was the tiniest spider on the ceiling, and I asked him to, if he could get it out for me, because I'm quite scared of spiders, I won't lie. And he went up to get it, and the spider moved, and he literally jumped off the bed in fear. And he goes into burning buildings for a living. So it is quite a scary thing. It's so irrational though, isn't it? Because of the size. They're obviously they're quite small. We're bigger than them. We're more intelligent than them. But for some reason, it is, petrifying. It's the legs, isn't it? So, introduction to phobias, that's where we are. Now, the book splits this really weirdly for some reason. So, it has all the introduction pages together, all the explanations together, and the treatment. So, I want to do it differently. So, if you've got some page numbers that you think aren't in order, that's why. So, we're going to start with phobias, move on to depression, and then finish with OCD, looking at explanations and treatment for each of them. So here, we're just going to be looking at what a phobia is. We've got 3 types that we need to understand. What are some characteristics? Now, characteristics and features are 2 different things. And the type of question that they love is explain the characteristics of. So if it's characteristics of phobias, it's going to be what makes that up. Whereas a feature is a little bit different, and we'll distinguish between the two a little bit later. Apply to some real life examples, and then obviously we need to, a key here is just to find the difference between a phobia and a fear. Okay, what makes them different? And that's what we'll explore here. But we're going to frame this lesson around a real news article. Okay, so we're going to look at one of the most unusual phobias, which is a fear of vegetables. Don't even try and make me say that, because it just will not happen. So this woman here, surrounded by vegetables, is left shaking at the sight of carrots and peas. Whoa. So what I've attached is Vicky's case for you to have a read of, and then 3 questions there that you can either annotate or just, it's more just to get an understanding of the symptoms, what is a phobia, what are the different types, and then what is the justification. So have a little read, and then have a look at what you would answer to these questions. Then we need to break down what a phobia actually is. So a phobia is a type of anxiety disorder. They're very different to fears because it's focused on something irrational. So we have irrational fears, they are phobias, okay? But it's more than just being scared. It's a physiological response, okay? So we have 3 types of phobias: specific, so of an object or a situation; social, so being outside or public speaking; social situation like public speaking; and then agoraphobia, so a phobia of being outside. So there are 3 types of phobias. So something specific would be spiders, public speaking is a social phobia, and then obviously leaving the house or going to the shops is agoraphobia. You don't want to be outside. So thinking about what Vicky's would be, have a think, which one would that apply to? And then what I have for you, just to really understand this idea of a characteristic of phobias, we've got emotional, behavioural and cognitive. So how you feel is emotional, how you behave is behavioural, and then what do you think about when you think of the object is cognitive. So have a look at those different characteristics on the sheet that I've put on showing my homework and split them into 3 categories. You could do it as a grid like this, you could bullet point it, either way, which would fit into what. So pause this now and have a go at that. And then when you come back, bit of self-assessment. So the emotional side of it, how we feel, is obviously the anxiety. Unreasonable or disproportionate responses is also how we feel as well. How we behave, so panic, avoidance, endurance. Cognitive, so there's rational beliefs, things that just don't make sense. Selective attention and cognitive distortions, okay? Now, cognitive distortions is probably one you haven't heard of. And this is where your mind pretty much blows up what the phobia is and makes it incredibly irrational. So you start to distort your viewpoint of something, okay? Then another thing for you to have a look at, maybe take 3 colours, highlight it, whatever you like. Pick out the behavioural, the cognitive and emotional characteristics from the scenarios. So this whole introduction is quite short really, because it's just getting you to understand behavioural, cognitive, excuse me, and emotional. So it's trying to depict those 3. So a bit of an application task. So pause this, have a look at that sheet to practice some of your AO2, and then come back when you're ready to have a look at the answers, which we have here. So Mary is obviously an agoraphobic. The behavioural side of it is panic, avoidance. She's got fear and anxiety. Irrational beliefs that she's going to die if she leaves the house. John, a social phobia, so he avoids the situation. That's how he's acting. He's feeling very anxious, and he has this irrational belief that potentially he might wet himself because of the panic. So kind of leading on from the behavioural. Lucy, specific. So she's got the panic is how she's feeling, how she's acting, sorry. The fear and the anxiety, how she's feeling. And then the irrational belief they're crawling under her skin. Excuse me. Tim, specific phobia. Behavioural, the panic, the avoidance. Emotional, again, the fear, anxiety. Those sort of crop up. And then the cognitive is that irrational belief that medical procedures will be painful and harmful to his well-being. Lee, finally, specific phobia. Behavioural is panic, avoidance. Emotional is the fear, the anxiety. High arousal just means very stressed. Cognitive is the irrational belief that all dogs are deliberately targeting him for attack and may kill him. Woo! Poor old Lee. Then if you want to do this, do it. This would have been a lovely activity. Sad times. So true or false from what we've looked at so far. A phobia is usually something that is genuinely harmful to us. Is false, it's irrational, it's something that we know to be ridiculous. People who have phobias know that they are irrational but can't seem to break that process or can't seem to understand or how to deal with it. A phobia is usually irrational. Yes, it is. Typically, someone with a phobia will experience panic. That is true. So panic is that behavioural characteristic. A phobia is not a type of anxiety disorder. What do you think? It's false. It makes it an anxiety disorder because of the physiological elements. So the sweating, the increased heart rate, pupil dilation. And we'll look at that when we look at explanations of phobias. But that's what makes it an anxiety disorder. To people who say, I'm really anxious, unless there is a physiological element, it's probably just nervousness. And it's quite easy for those two to be misconstrued. A specific phobia is a fear of a social situation. False, two separate categories. A fear of spiders is an example of a specific phobia. A hell yes. A cognitive, so thought about thinking characteristic, is how we feel about our feared object. False, that is a behavioural characteristic. Avoiding the feared object is an example of a behavioural. That is true. Experiencing anxiety is an example of an emotional characteristic. That is true. And then a summary. Very, very short introduction, just to give you an idea of those three characteristics. 2 key points, and maybe a question you still want answering, something new. How could you summarise what we have looked at in this very short video?